Story 1. I'd say it's probably Child Protective Services. I can't imagine child after child being removed from drug labs and motel brothels. Story 2. Anything in a nursing home was the most depressing job I ever had. I would become friends with many of the residents, only to come in the next morning and find out they had died overnight. Then I had to put on a brave and happy face for 8 hours. Story 3. I believe emergency room doctors and nurses, veterinary staff, and first responders are the ones who witness the worst of humanity up close, but are expected to remain professional in the most abhorrent situations imaginable. Story 4. Those individuals who must clean up crime scenes, as well as those who work as legal content screeners for social media platforms, are faced with challenging and distressing tasks. Story 5. Incoming call centers can be terrible. You often get insulted and even threatened. I once worked for an insurance company. I remember a caller who wanted to cancel his insurance. Before proceeding, I confirmed which policy he wanted to cancel to ensure I handled it correctly and he wouldn't have to call back. He immediately threatened to fine me and cause me harm. I just wanted to resolve the issue in one call to avoid multiple calls. Unfortunately, it happened far too often. I left that job feeling broken and developed a dislike for people. I tend to avoid conflict. Even after 10 years, I still experience anxiety when I hear someone yelling at an employee. I now work in information technology. Story 6. Veterinarians have a significantly high suicide rate compared to other healthcare workers. Story 7. I was a missionary for 1 year. I have extreme depression and anxiety from working with the Christians on my team. It broke my heart and challenged my worldview. I still follow Christ, but I don't have much to do with Christians, especially the American ones. It's 30 years later, and I am still not the person I was. Story 8. Corrections officers. Living among people who do not belong in society alters your perspective of the world. Story 9. Any job where you work nights is challenging. I switch from days to nights every 2 weeks, and the 2-week shift on nights is always very difficult for me. Story 10. Customer service involves facing daily frustrations while maintaining a smile, despite experiencing a silent breakdown. Story 11. One of my friends works as an orderly in a children's ward at a mental health hospital. Here are some of the stories he has shared. 1. A 7-year-old girl was sold by her mother and her boyfriend for drug money. A 5-year-old boy's mother had a fixation with inserting objects into his rectum, and he was admitted with a AA battery still inside him. A 13-year-old girl was found to be carrying her father's child. A 9-year-old boy was regularly burned with a curling iron or flat iron, causing his hands, arms, and wrists to contract painfully into tight shapes. A child, orphaned during a winter storm while in a grocery store, was found malnourished. This child, assumed to be 4 to 5 years old, had been sexually abused and was wearing only a diaper and a t-shirt with no shoes. He has shared many more heart-wrenching stories, revealing the harsh realities that exist. Story 12. Early childhood education. Being a teacher aide was enjoyable, but running a pre-kindergarten program after COVID-19 was extremely challenging. The children are intelligent, but they also display emotional immaturity. The one-on-one time with affluent parents who rarely set boundaries makes the experience difficult. Low pay, burnout, and being overwhelmed by children whose parents earn significantly more than I do add to the stress. Story 13. The military can be quite challenging. Even if you never experience an active war zone, the work schedule will likely take a toll on your physical health, mental well-being, and relationships. It can create a toxic environment. If you do happen to be in a war zone, you will likely witness distressing events. Story 14. Teaching can be quite challenging. As a high school teacher, I am surrounded by a wide range of emotions all day long. The hormones and feelings of teenagers can be overwhelming. Additionally, many students face difficult situations outside of school, and I often hear about their struggles. I have had to contact Child Protective Services numerous times. This situation takes a toll on me, and I often don't have time to address my own emotions or mental health. I frequently go home worrying about various students. Story 15. I believe that social workers play a crucial role. I often feel as though I am working against a system that is determined to neglect the most vulnerable populations, and this can lead to burnout very quickly. Story 16. Call centers are not necessarily about the job, but about the people who work there. They often hire anyone due to high turnover and do a poor job of drug testing, if they do it at all. This essentially means that the least qualified individuals are present. Several times a month at my specific center, someone is either arrested or an ambulance is called because of overdosing in the single restroom designated for handicapped use. On one occasion, a shooting threat was reported, and no one was evacuated except for the management. We only learned about it because law enforcement was present at quitting time. Many employees only remain through training to earn some quick money, which negatively impacts everyone else on the floor due to high call volumes. You cannot leave until the call queue is empty. Unfortunately, these are the only reasonably paying jobs in my area of the United States, and I cannot afford to return to college to pursue something more meaningful in my life. Story 17. Anyone who screens objectionable content for platforms like YouTube, TikTok, or social media constantly encounters the worst things people attempt to post, such as child abuse and horrifying violence. Story 18. Restaurants have long hours, requiring you to be on your feet constantly, while facing ever-growing demands from the public, primarily affluent customers. They are the only ones in today's economy who can afford the premium on food. This lifestyle often leads to little to no social life and increases the risk of developing addictive behaviors, whether related to cigarettes or alcohol. It can create feelings of resentment towards everyone around you, including both staff and customers. It feels like being a conscripted soldier in a battle between the staff and the public. Story 19. I'm going to suggest that it is likely to be the front counter at a busy fast food restaurant, especially during rush hour. Depending on the location, you may encounter very abusive customers, such as at McDonald's, Hungry Jack's, or KFC. Alternatively, it could be emergency services or the military. Story 20. I am a full-time caregiver for my mother, who has end-stage dementia. I have been caring for her for over 5 years, and my mental health is suffering. Story 21. Funeral homes can evoke feelings of compassion fatigue, which can be quite overwhelming. I often felt more like a grief counselor than anything else, and I will never forget some of the deceased individuals I encountered. Story 22. The kind that constantly raises the standard for satisfactory work. Employers that pay little, have no set schedule, and offer no safety or security. Jobs that do not allow for vacation, whether due to prohibitively low wages or forced overtime with no time off. Essentially, anything that makes you feel like you are constantly moving backward, with no light at the end of the tunnel, no hope for retirement, or the ability to enjoy life because you can barely afford to make it through your shift between rent, travel, and food. Story 23. Any job that serves people, such as healthcare, retail, first responders, and social workers, is valuable. These individuals are dedicated to helping others, yet they often face significant challenges. Story 24. Statistically, military personnel and slaughterhouse workers have nearly the same rates of post-traumatic stress disorder, according to some surveys. Slaughterhouse workers are affected by long hours in challenging environments, similar to the conditions depicted in certain PETA videos. Story 25. The ones where you get to see the very worst of what humans can do to each other include the experiences of police officers, paramedics, and social workers. Teachers also face challenges. Having a 4-year-old share that "Daddy bit Mummy with a knife" can be emotionally taxing. Story 26. I would say anyone who works in customer service. They deal with people yelling at them and blaming them for things that are not their fault. Story 27. I was going to say therapy and therapists. I've heard that many therapists need their own therapists because sometimes what they hear is just so distressing. Story 28. I worked at one of the Texas state-supported living centers where many individuals had committed various crimes. Many of them had cases of assault, rape, and murder. We were unable to defend ourselves if they became violent. Our only option was essentially to run. It was unsettling to walk in every day, wondering if it would be the day I would be assaulted. Story 29. I am a certified nursing assistant, and I can honestly say I have never felt more depressed and happy at the same time in my life. My residents are people, human beings with lives, accomplishments, and families, and they sit in the same room every night and slowly lose their minds alone. The number of people in this line of work who do not deserve their licenses or certifications is alarming. They treat these individuals like dogs, yanking them up and repeating themselves incessantly. I truly believe that dementia is often exacerbated by how we treat these individuals, like they do not know anything, as if they could not possibly do the things they have done throughout their lives. It is so sad. I try my very best to make my residents feel human, allowing them a voice in everything I do. If my residents do not want to get up, I do not force them into the chair because it is my job. I come back and ask them again later. I have only been doing this for about a year, and while I understand it can be frustrating, I cannot imagine treating a person the way I see some others do. It breaks my heart. So far, I have only had one resident die on me. It was the worst experience of my life. A man I cared for and watched fade away was now dead on the bed that I put him in every night. I watched the life drain from him. He stopped eating, and I desperately tried to get him to try just a little. I would stay there late at night trying to encourage him to eat at least something. Then, my nurse told me something that will haunt me for the rest of my life. "It's okay, Michaela, you tried your best. But sometimes we have to let them go." The nursing field is often driven by money. The longer we keep this man alive, the longer he suffers and the more money they make. It's his time. I cried so hard. I knew she was right. They had given that man so many artificial parts that he was not truly alive anymore. His body was merely responding. He was not with us anymore. I could see it in his eyes. The man I once knew recognized his name, even if he did not know who I was. He knew his daughter's name, recognized his wife's name, and identified his favorite hat. He knew how to joke around, shaking his head at me when we did not understand each other. He only spoke Spanish, and while we never really understood each other, we managed to communicate through gestures. I learned Spanish because of him. The next day, just as I walked in, my relief told me he had just died. His family had rushed in, and I had only just clocked in. I watched them rush to their father, their husband, their grandfather, their brother. I did not cry. I held it together until they pulled me into the room for cleanup. I broke down when I saw his stiff body and tried not to look. His family surrounded me with love. They hugged me, and we all cried together. They thanked me repeatedly, telling me they had heard that someone had stayed with him all night and tried to get him to eat. Even people I had never met treated me like family. It felt as if I truly knew him, the love he had for his wife, the love he had for his children, and the pain in his brother's eyes. I told them he waited for them, that he did not want to go out alone. I knew he waited for them to be by his side. After they left, it was just us certified nursing assistants and the nurse with him. I cried so hard. He was so still and yet peaceful. We had to move his body, and that broke me. I love what I do. It can be painful at times, but that simple thank you, that appreciation for everything I have done for them, that final moment when I know they are at peace brings some kind of peace to me too. Story 30. Accounting. The overtime and burnout during the financial year-end is overwhelming. It was also mentally taxing working for a real estate investment trust. Corporations trying to evict as many people as possible from their homes to raise rents are disheartening. Being an accountant for a real estate investment trust was the worst experience of my life. Story 31. I am a psychiatric nurse practitioner and therapist. I have worked in the public sector for decades. A significant majority of my patients were and are 8 years old and younger, all subjected to physical, sexual, and mental abuse. Most of the women I have seen in my practice were affiliated with the Mormon Church. Please do not refer to me as a church therapist. I am competent in my profession. I am an exception to the rule of burnout. How have I not burned out despite the incredibly painful and devastating stories I have heard from the children and occasionally women I have treated? I love children and adults with all my heart, and I work with them to alleviate their suffering and provide some measure of peace and safety. In other words, I am not just listening to their pain and horror. I am actively helping them. I have cried in my office a time or two upon hearing stories of particularly severe treatment of children and women associated with the Mormon Church. The church should be dismantled, brick by brick, and its leaders are deeply flawed. Story 32. Emergency call takers in the city where I worked had separate teams for fire department, emergency medical services, and police department. The fire department could send help, while emergency medical services could send assistance and provide medical advice, including guiding someone through the process of delivering a baby. Police department calls were typically the most distressing, as they often represented the worst day of someone's life. As a result, personnel in the police department experienced burnout much faster than those in other services. Story 33. I am sure there are worse situations, but I have worked in psychiatric hospitals for 10 years and it has made me quite jaded. I believe some aspects of my thought processes have been irreparably altered by working with them. Story 34. I would guess military personnel, first responders, and emergency room and intensive care unit staff would probably be at the top, although working in the food service and hospitality industry is definitely no picnic. Story 35. Social workers, military personnel, therapists, police officers, and veterinarians have a high suicide rate. This issue also affects teachers, journalists, and individuals working in politics. Story 36. I am a pediatric critical care nurse, and it definitely takes a huge toll on my mental health. Seeing the things that happen to children, what people do to children, and witnessing kids actively dying is not very comforting. Story 37. Prison guard. Changes you. It gives you a bleak perspective on your fellow humans. Over time, you will likely develop emotional problems and experience difficulties at home. Story 38. The veterinary field can be challenging. You encounter situations that are difficult to witness and interact with individuals who are often unaware of their pets' needs and suffering. With the rise of social media and review platforms, there seems to be an attitude that people know more than veterinarians simply because they searched online for pet symptoms. This can lead to unwarranted negativity, pushing many seasoned professionals to their limits. After 16 years, I chose to stop working hands-on because the majority of clients became increasingly daunting to deal with. For instance, we once treated an emergency case involving a large dog in severe distress. The owner transported the dog in the trunk of an Audi R8, and when he arrived, he was outraged about having to pay $60 for the emergency exam. He insisted on a free consultation because it was Thanksgiving, claiming it was inconvenient for him to bring his dog in, despite his declarations of love for the pet. Unfortunately, the dog was suffering from gastric dilatation volvulus, a condition that is often fatal if not treated promptly. The owner insisted the dog merely had a stomachache from overeating turkey and accused us of fabricating a diagnosis for financial gain. The dog ultimately did not survive, as the owner delayed assistance, stating that the dog had only been unwell for about 10 minutes before arriving. In the aftermath, the owner issued threats, reported us to the Veterinary Medical Board, and even took us to small claims court, claiming we had caused his dog's death through misdiagnosis. However, the findings were in our favor, as the condition was unrelated to turkey consumption. The dog's stomach had ruptured due to the buildup of gas from the dilatation volvulus, and there was a large obstruction causing additional complications. Fortunately, we had the foresight to document the necropsy with photographs at the time. Story 39. I work in the detective bureau within my city's police department. I transcribe interviews with suspects and witnesses verbatim. I create accurate transcriptions of confessions for various offenses, including murder, vehicular manslaughter, and sexual assault. I also document the moments when individuals are informed of their loved one's passing. It requires a significant amount of time and effort to capture every word, as it is not like television where everything is scripted neatly. People speak hesitantly and rarely complete coherent sentences. They often mumble or talk over one another, making the task challenging. Consequently, I have to listen repeatedly to a man describe how he assaulted his 3-year-old grandchild. Today, I listened to a woman with a cognitive impairment describe how she accidentally rolled over onto her infant while sleeping, resulting in his suffocation. This marked the second occurrence of a similar incident within the last 10 days. I feel that I do not receive adequate compensation for this work. Story 40. My mom works in insurance, and I cannot express how stressful the workplace is at the moment, with extremely busy workdays and poor management. Story 41. I am really surprised I haven't seen long-haul truck drivers on this list. They spend weeks or months away from home for pay that is probably not worth it. They miss events constantly, have no social life, and work over 100 hours a week if you count time spent inside the sleeper. It's a challenging occupation. Story 42. It may sound cliché, but military life can be challenging, even if you have never experienced combat. The schedule is demanding, making it difficult to build romantic relationships, and it often leaves you feeling exhausted. Those who remain in the military long enough often exhibit poor leadership. Many people simply wait for others to retire or pass away to advance. This reality is grim, as there are numerous losses of friends due to combat, incidents, or even suicide. Overall, it can be a toxic and dark environment. Definitely a nightmare for human resources if civilians were to witness it. While there are a few good leaders and lifelong friends made along the way, it was not enough for me to decide to stay. Story 43. I work with inmates. It's challenging when they make mistakes that jeopardize everything they have worked for while incarcerated. I return home every night, and many individuals are in prison because they cannot afford a $500 bond or a traffic ticket. Some of the most admirable people I have ever met are behind bars. One mistake does not define a person, and dependency issues should not define them either. Can be disheartening. However, it is quite uplifting when I discover that someone is truly doing well. Story 44. Anything related to emergency medical technicians, paramedics, nursing and medical care, law enforcement, the military, and the fire department. Story 45. Nursing involves challenges, often related to management practices and their impact on staff. Story 46. I have many friends in healthcare, so I would say that is my priority. I work in technology, primarily startups, and have unfortunately encountered many individuals with cluster B personality disorders. It feels like psychological warfare for no reason. We are not saving lives. The backstabbing, drama, and adults who act like children with fragile egos have really taken a toll on my mental health. Story 47. Right now, perhaps stock market brokers. Not the big players at the top, but the smaller brokers at the bottom doing all the work. Story 48. Being a musician comes with its challenges, including the ebb and flow of gigs, time spent on the road, and often poor sleep and diet schedules. While there are perks, such as complimentary drinks at venues, various issues can easily accumulate. Story 49. I believe social workers, paramedics, content moderators for platforms like Facebook, those working in child protective services, and emergency dispatchers all play important roles. Story 50. I wouldn't compare the stress to what doctors and nurses experience, but personally, cooking for 10 years definitely takes its toll on you. Not to mention the substances involved. Story 51. Funeral director and mortician. It nearly broke me for real. I still dream about some of the cases, and I left the business over 10 years ago. Story 52. Definitely in the medical field and first responders such as police officers, firefighters, paramedics, and social workers. I have driven home, 30 minutes away, feeling disoriented due to anxious breathing from my nursing job. There is not enough help, appreciation, or recognition for us. Story 53. Law enforcement must review child sexual abuse images. I believe I read that it is a very short-term assignment due to the impact on their mental health. Story 54. Trucking not only results in being labeled as a low-quality lifestyle, but often we are the first on the scene. It is always the worst when it involves children or a family that has been affected on the road. Story 55. I am a hairdresser. I have worked in high-stress, high-stakes corporate environments, but this is worse. People constantly unload their problems on you while you are expected to create art and entertain them. On average, you earn far below a livable wage. Story 56. A district manager for a pizza chain turned out to be my worst job ever for my mental health. 70-hour weeks, no employees, and the ones I had were burned out. The pandemic made it unbearable. It was never great, but that made it worse. After 3 trips to rehab, the only major change I made was my job, and it gave me the space to reset. Story 57. The individuals who must review flagged content for issues such as child exploitation or animal abuse on social media. Story 58. Case managers and social workers play a vital role in supporting families during difficult times. My mother was a case manager for children whose parents were undergoing contentious divorces. The experience was so traumatic that she developed post-traumatic stress disorder and was forced into early retirement. Story 59. I want to bring up an unexpected topic and talk about frontline information technology. I have been working in this field for a long time and have witnessed 3 deaths, multiple hospitalizations, and widespread issues with alcohol and drug abuse. Story 60. There are individuals whose job is to review all the video of horrific child exploitation to seek clues for identifying victims or perpetrators. Story 61. Slaughterhouses involve physically demanding, dangerous, or repetitive work at high speeds in extreme temperatures, often with unsanitary conditions. The workforce can vary widely, including individuals with questionable backgrounds. Police officers in high-crime areas must constantly confront severe societal challenges and dysfunction. Emergency room personnel face the traumatic experience of treating patients with severe injuries and making efforts to save lives, which includes witnessing the loss of young lives. This can be profoundly distressing. Story 62. I have done some work in the anti-poaching field in parts of East and South Africa. I have encountered rhinos that were slaughtered for their horns, with explosives left underneath them intended to kill the anti-poaching units trying to track the poachers. It is a dark reflection of human greed and senseless cruelty. Story 63. The worst job I ever had was during college. For a couple of semesters, I worked part-time and sometimes full-time at a call center for a well-known cell phone company. My job involved taking calls from people who had questions about their bills or encountered problems with their service. About 50% of the calls were from rude individuals demanding all kinds of things and threatening to sue. Their issues usually stemmed from not paying their bill for a month or 2, which is why their cell phone did not work. Some were trying to scam the company, pulling the customer is always right card, demanding to speak to a manager because they were angry. Approximately 30% of the calls came from people who were extremely upset about something. They had various reasons to feel justified in their anger, but they still treated us poorly, despite our efforts to resolve their issues. The remaining 20% of the calls involved people who had problems, whether self-inflicted or otherwise, but acted like reasonable individuals. They accepted when they were wrong or expressed gratitude when we fixed their issues. If we handled about 50 calls every day during our 8-hour shift, that meant I dealt with something like 40 calls from angry individuals almost every day of the week. That amounts to 240 calls from frustrated people insulting me every week. That became exhausting quickly. There are certainly worse and more stressful jobs out there, but many of them pay significantly better than my previous position to compensate for the level of stress such a soul-crushing experience entails. Story 64. Nursing homes or residential care for the elderly can be challenging. I was in home care in 2023 for 3 months. One of the patients passed away due to sepsis, and I still feel responsible. The armed forces can also have a negative impact on mental health, as can emergency medical staff. Story 65. Anything dealing with vulnerable populations, such as emergency rooms, nursing homes, child protective services, low-income housing, and advocacy groups, can be challenging. It is very difficult to confront human suffering regularly without it affecting you. Additionally, in the United States, counseling is not always accessible due to insurance issues. Story 66. I am a 911 dispatcher. Fortunately, I work for an agency that prioritizes mental health, but the calls still take a toll. I notice it affects my coworkers as well. Story 67. I would guess customer service. I have worked in customer service jobs and have had a customer actually take a swing at me for matters beyond my control. I have been punched 3 times at work in my life. I am not a people person. Then there are the managers who don't make things any easier. No, I am not working late because you fired the cashier. No, I cannot come in on my day off. It is my day off and I have plans. It doesn't matter what those plans are. I am not breaking them for you. My last job was terrible because our customers were retail store managers. Want to know the biggest bunch of babies on the planet? Retail store managers. Last month, I was told to drop everything around 1 p.m. and drive almost 5 hours away to replace a self-checkout printer because the store was complaining about it. The local technicians didn't have a printer, and the president of that retail chain was demanding that we prioritize this small store in the middle of nowhere, and I was told that it didn't matter what I had planned that night. This had to be done. This is the first week of my new job. Story 68. The people who monitor Facebook and other social media sites for inappropriate content have to watch this material repeatedly. Story 69. Unsurprisingly, the mental health sector can be draining. Listening to individuals who are upset about medication, dealing with threats, and spending hours on calls to support those in crisis can lead to burnout. Story 70. Divers who need to retrieve bodies or deal with death or crime scenes, especially aftermaths. Story 71. First responders, hospice workers, individuals in emergency rooms, low-income individuals recruited into the military under false pretenses, social workers, and many positions in the service industry such as teaching often leave people feeling used and undervalued, only to be discarded when they are no longer deemed profitable. Story 72. There was a cool Reddit post on AskReddit where the question was, Redditors who got a useless degree, how did it turn out? The list of jobs people had was surprisingly positive. It is interesting to compare and contrast what people had to say about their careers and the jobs they have. Story 73. Being a teacher in an unsupportive environment, particularly when working with students who need additional assistance, can be challenging. Story 74. Special education is a challenging job, and it has become much harder due to cuts in the Department of Education. Story 75. Ones where instead of working to protect you from petty individuals unduly screaming at you, your union steward is the petty individual unduly screaming at you. Story 76. The researchers found that suicide rates were highest among individuals working in 5 major industries: mining, quarrying and oil and gas extraction, construction, agriculture, forestry, fishing and hunting, transportation, and other services such as automotive repair. Story 77. Telemarketing is the worst job I have ever done personally. You spend all day getting yelled at. It's a high-pressure and cutthroat environment. Your income is unstable because it is so dependent on commission. Even when you are not at work, it is awful. When I would meet new people and they would inevitably ask what I did for work, I would tell them and they would be rude to my face about it. Oh, I hate people like you. I hang up on you. If you ever called me, I would just waste your time. Every Friday around 4 p.m., I would start dreading Monday. I spent my whole weekend just stressing that Monday was coming. I would stay up until 3 or 4 a.m. on weeknights just because I knew if I went to sleep, I would have to wake up and go back to work. Every morning, as I drove to the office, I thought to myself, if I drive my car into a ditch, I won't have to go to work today. I hoped each night I would go to sleep and not wake up. When I finally got fired, it was the biggest relief. I felt the weight leave my shoulders. I vowed to any higher power that would listen that I would never do that job again. Story 78. Suicide Hotline. You must know what to say and anticipate what will occur during a call from an anonymous person that you cannot locate immediately. Contacting authorities and tracing the individual is a process that takes time. Story 79. This may be biased as I am a doctor, but out of the subspecialties, it would probably have to be emergency medicine or pediatric oncology. I am an anesthesiologist, so I occasionally work with both subspecialties. It is just brutal what they go through day to day. Story 80. Prison guards experience a very high suicide rate and often end up on long-term disability due to severe post-traumatic stress disorder. Prisons bring out the worst in people, and the guards are left to face the madness with minimal support. Story 81. Does anyone think being a safety professional is appropriate? Being responsible for employee safety, caring more than the employees themselves, and being accountable for the consequences of a poor safety culture and bad decisions. Story 82. Cancer specialists changed their focus from hematology. They could no longer handle another leukemia fatality. Story 83. I had a short experience working as a death investigator. Almost a year later, I still have post-traumatic stress disorder from some of the things I witnessed. Story 84. Information technology, especially in critical operations and cybersecurity, can significantly impact mental health. I have encountered more individuals with mental health issues in the IT field than in other areas where I have worked over the years, drawing on decades of experience. Issues such as excessive alcohol consumption, overuse of prescription medication, reliance on over-the-counter medications, and high levels of cannabis use are prevalent. Many people struggle to get through their days after a few years in the industry. It takes everything they have just to keep moving. When you combine long periods of relative calm with short bursts of intense panic, while expecting everyone to stay updated with the most urgent news and information changes, it creates a breeding ground for anxiety and depression. Some of the most affected individuals display symptoms similar to trauma disorders. Ironically, this sector is often marketed as an ideal place to work and a pathway to financial success. It is discussed as if it were a video game, but once you find yourself in the trenches, the reality can be brutal. I have attended several conferences where this topic arises, and participants engage in lengthy discussions about possible solutions without reaching any definitive answers. Like many other professions, we have become cogs in the machine, regardless of our expertise, determination, skills, aspirations, and dreams. Story 85. Anything in film and television can be challenging. I have worked 7 consecutive 20-hour days. One of my coworkers, a young man in his 20s, fell in the shower and tragically passed away during that time. Story 86. My friend told me about a division of cyber officers tasked with reviewing explicit child material. They had to watch everything in the videos to document their findings and create reports, ensuring that no one else had to watch it. These officers had to be rotated frequently. Story 87. I am a 911 dispatcher. I cannot say it has improved my mental health, but it has greatly contributed to my decline. This is similar for all emergency services. Story 88. Basically, every job that doesn't pay a livable wage, which includes most jobs available to the working class. Story 89. Working with the elderly and being a police officer are both important roles. You witness the darker sides of human nature. Story 90. Child stars, as well as the children of family vlog channels, often experience less of a job and more abuse. Story 91. Sales can often be high stress and morally questionable, characterized by high-pressure environments and the attitude of, "What have you done for me today?" Story 92. The customer service representatives and home care registered nurses who worked in palliative and hospice care at the healthcare organization I used to work at faced challenging situations daily. Their work, around the clock, involved dealing with difficult circumstances and loss, affecting both young and old patients. Story 93. I was a customer service representative at a call center for unemployment claims in 2020. When COVID-19 hit and unemployment reached an all-time high, I handled around 100 calls a day. In between calls, we had 10 seconds to take a breather before another phone call came through. I often faced hostility and anger from callers demanding their money, making it the most taxing job on my mental health to date. Story 94. Reddit doesn't love salespeople because they think they are all like car salespeople. However, sales is one of the most emotionally taxing jobs. Story 95. I cannot speak for all fields, but as a social worker with experience in multiple areas, I struggle in high-stress environments under a poor supervisor. With strong leadership and support, most of us can effectively assist individuals with high needs while maintaining our own well-being. Story 96. I worked in a gas station in a lower-income neighborhood. My mom used to work at that location. It was once a decent working-class area, but it deteriorated over time. By the time I worked there, we experienced overdoses in the bathroom, high theft, and fights in the parking lot. Shortly before I left, one of my coworkers was maced by someone he caught stealing. That job nearly broke me. Story 97. Sales can be unpredictable. One moment you may feel like a hero, and the next you might face termination. You receive positive feedback but are also criticized. This inconsistency can be challenging, especially if you have children and other responsibilities. Story 98. Emergency dispatch operates under the supervision of a sheriff or police chief, often making you feel no more important than a receptionist. Story 99. Investment banking is a cutthroat, soul-crushing job with good pay. You know it is bad for you, but you cannot escape it because of the money involved. Story 100. Teaching suffers from a lack of respect from parents and students, coupled with inadequate compensation for a critical profession. Expectations continue to increase. Story 101. For me, it was several jobs where the bosses were cruel. They did not care about the people working there. Story 102. Customer care representatives, specifically in call centers, often handle a high volume of calls daily. Dealing with frustrated customers repeatedly can be extremely draining. Story 103. I would guess jobs like child protective services agents, police officers, hospice care workers, emergency service dispatchers, and pediatricians. Story 104. I had a travel job that I enjoyed and I liked most of the people I worked with. However, moving to a new city every week, living in hotel rooms, landing on Friday, relaxing at home on Saturday, doing laundry and packing on Sunday, and taking an early flight on Monday really took a toll on my mental health. That was years ago, and honestly, I'm still recovering. Story 105. Basically, anything where caring for your customers is a job requirement can be a huge emotional load and is often used as an excuse to pay you less. Well, if you actually cared. Story 106. Emergency medicine. Anyone who works in an emergency room or on an ambulance is not okay mentally. Story 107. Being a mental health support worker in a facility was more challenging than all my years of physical construction work. Being constantly burdened by people at their lowest points can wear you down quickly. Story 108. I believe that statistically, in my country, construction workers have the highest suicide rate of any job. They work long, hard hours for little pay, often in an industry characterized by a toxic culture where discussing feelings is not encouraged. Story 109. Being a paramedic was quite challenging for me. I moved on almost a year ago and am still trying to figure out how to live like a normal person. Story 110. I went out with a girl who was a nurse at a children's cancer hospital. On our first date, she was crying as she talked about how she spends time with the kids, and half of them do not survive. I can't think of a more emotionally draining job. Story 111. Retail has been part of my life for 14 years, and I feel completely drained. I have no time for the things I love, and everything feels rushed. There is no happiness, only depression and stress every day. Higher management treats our work as if it is life-saving, but it is not that serious. I don't spend time or communicate with my family, and I struggle with my feelings towards people. Even in my relationship, I feel like I have nothing to give, and I'm unsure why my partner is still with me. Perhaps it is because we met at work and he understands what I'm going through. My life feels completely worthless. Story 112. Architecture. From the beginning, studio culture is toxic. Teachers foster and push students towards spending all-nighters doing work, turning it into a badge of honor that signifies how many days you remained awake. You receive critiques every day in the studio from your peers, and it's usually harsh. The countless times I have witnessed people break down, cry, or quit is alarming. During my year in school, there were 3 suicides and several incidents of students suffering from a lack of sleep. This culture also continues into the workforce, where employers offer low pay and expect you to complete projects regardless of the circumstances. It is not uncommon to work 16-hour days, despite your salary. No one wants to be the first to leave, and when you do, you are negatively marked. Moreover, it does not get better with experience and seniority, as they expect you to be on call 24/7. It is common for project managers to contact you after working hours, sending you tasks and demanding they be completed by the next morning. Additionally, consider the pay gap. Most people do not earn over $100,000 until 10 years into their careers, and that is only if they have project management experience. If not, you are at a significant disadvantage. Story 113. I work in disability insurance in the United States. I can confirm that software development and engineering have a significantly high incidence of mental health claims. Outside of work, I have friends who are various types of first responders, ranging from former deputy coroners to police officers. They have truly dealt with intense situations, and what they see when they close their eyes is different from what the rest of us experience. Story 114. Anything in the corporate world robbed me of my soul for decades, only to be discarded when it was advantageous to them. Story 115. I am a teacher, and I love my job and my students. However, there are times when it takes a toll on my mental health. My school has around 1,200 students, and I am one of the more popular teachers. The downside is that I become the go-to teacher for many students to discuss their personal problems. With so many students facing intense issues, it can be overwhelming. Story 116. The funeral director could no longer handle the baby and child funerals, as it began to severely impact their mental health. Story 117. The authorities that have to watch hours of poorly filmed content. Story 118. I have a history of psychotic disorder issues with about 7 or 8 hospitalizations. I think the job that broke me was data entry. At one point, it seemed like they were printing out lists of numbers and asking me to type them in for 8 hours a day. I'm not exaggerating. They decided I was not good at the work, so they furloughed me for a week or two. Somewhere on some hard drive in a landfill is a typed list of random numbers that I painstakingly copied out, double-checking for mistakes, and saved to a folder on the C drive. So why did I do it? At some point in my early adult life, I realized that adult life is 99% nonsense. I just go with the flow. Any attempt to speak out and say, "This is silly," goes down like a lead balloon. The thing I realized later in my adult life is that the less you try, the better you succeed. The more I give up, the more good things get forced on me. I have a nice place to live, a car, and perfect physical health aside from obesity. This is a serious post. Story 119. I worked rotating shifts for 30 years. Everyone had drug habits and every type of dysfunction imaginable. I live alone now, do not socialize, and cannot sleep for more than 2 hours at a time. Story 120. Emergency room doctor. It is definitely a whirlwind of emotions. Some days feel truly empowering and incredibly rewarding, while the next shift can leave you feeling absolutely destroyed and hanging by a thread. I've come home feeling on cloud 9, and I've also come home wanting to just lie down in the dark and cry. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.